First, we're going to start with a word from our sponsor.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm proud to represent our law firm, Davis Wright Tremaine, which is a sponsor of this business track and for the Oregon Wine Symposium. We really look forward to this event every year and are excited to be a sponsor every year and really consider ourselves to be part of this industry with you. As lawyers, we work closely with our winery, vineyard, and industry clients, providing counsel on everything from strategic transactions, distribution, trademark, immigration, permitting, you name it, including employment law, which is what I do and where I've met and worked with some of you before. So please stop by our booth when you get a chance. We're on the left when you first come into the exhibit hall. We have some great handouts on a variety of topics, legal issues impacting your businesses. So everything from playing music in your wineries to the new Oregon law that just went into effect in January with the new maximum hours and rest periods for your winery employees. We have handouts on all that. Or you can just talk to myself or one of our colleagues about anything you want, trademark, distribution, your grapes and bottles. That's always the most fun. So thanks, have a great event, and we'll look forward to talking with you.
Thank you. Welcome. We gather this afternoon to dive into benchmarking, monitoring, and optimizing your wine business for maximum profitability. My name is Lesley Berglund. My company is the Wise Academy, and we work on the business side of the wine industry, helping wineries with various types of change management projects to help them become more successful. I'm thrilled to be asked back to participate again this year in the Oregon Wine Symposium. I'm joined on this panel by Matt Franklin, a principal at Zepponi and Company, which handles mergers and acquisitions in the alcohol beverage industry, including lots of high-profile winery transactions. Next to Matt, we have Jeff Peterson, Associate Professor of Sociology at Linfield College, who has just completed the first, or is in the process of completing, the first Oregon Wine Industry Salary Survey, which is an important part of the Oregon Wine Board's education initiative. Next to Jeff, we have innovator, researcher, renegade, and respected wine industry leader, Tim Hanni. Tim is CEO of eCode.me, as well as vice president of the Institute of Masters of Wine for North America. During this afternoon's panel, we'll cover 5 related topics, and here's how it's going to work. Matt and I together will explore the first 3 topics, and I'm going to sit down and we'll do that together. First, we'll be focusing on benchmarking, how we can use it to optimize channel mix that drives improved profitability. Second, we'll share some available analytical tools to help you measure what really matters. And third, we'll offer a proactive health checkup, including preventative steps, just like when you go to the doctor, for a health checklist to planning tips, and that things you can do, steps you can take to make sure that your winery is set up for future success. Then we'll turn the microphone over to Jeff Peterson, who'll share with us some of the preliminary results from the Oregon Salary Survey. Finally, Tim Hanni will demonstrate the Profitability Calculator, a tool he has tailored for Oregon wineries to help you better understand your true cost of goods sold, variable pricing, and channel management strategies. Now I'm going to take a seat, and Matt and I will get going on the first section. Okay. As Matt and I prepared for the first portion of this panel together, we realized how much we have in common. Matt works with wineries to help them prepare to sell, and I work with wineries to help them be more successful. While our jobs are very different, the advice we give wineries is often almost exactly the same. So while our discussion today is not about preparing your winery for sale, it is about helping you become more successful. It's also about giving you the freedom to decide. If you want to hold on to your business and keep running it, great. If you want to get ready to hand it over to the next generation, great. Or if you do want to prepare it for sale, great. It doesn't matter because the steps for success that we're going to be discussing today are exactly the same. So the first, what we're going to start with is a case study. And so to come up with some of the benchmarking case studies for our conversation, Matt and I tapped our own client experiences between our two organizations, as well as those of many other wine industry financial service providers. This next discussion is about channel strategy, not about product mix. We're going to leave that to Tim to handle. And we wanted to start with some common financial benchmarks for a fictional 5,000 case winery that is, in this case, when we started out, struggling to be profitable. Now, I know that 75% of Oregon wineries are smaller than 5,000 cases, but that's fine because the same percentages and lessons will still apply. I've actually seen dozens and dozens of wineries with similar profiles. Let's take a look at this example. It's a 5,000 case winery, average bottle price $35, currently sells 25% direct-to-consumer channel, 75% through trade. As a result, the blended gross margin is 54%. Direct sales as a percentage of total revenue, direct sales and marketing costs, is running about 25%, and G&A, general administrative, is running at 30%. Now that only leaves 1% in operating income. That's not enough operating income to service debt or to send the kids to college, and it's not a lot of fun. Frankly, it's often when people like me get called in. The first place I start in working with wineries who need to go through some type of change management is talking about the gross margin. Because you can't fix a business if the foundation economics are not in place. First is a 54% gross margin good or bad? I know Rob McMillan this morning said on average Silicon Valley Bank was showing about 57%. Is that a good or bad gross margin? Well, that's actually the wrong question. It is what it is, given the channel mix. The right question is what is my gross margin by channel? And then assuming each channel is in line, what should my channel mix be? And so if we are looking, so one of the first keys when I'm working with a new client is often we are given a P&L or an income statement for the entire business, not broken out by channel. And so the very first thing I do is reverse engineer, let's get this broken out by channel. What you guys know in your gut that direct-to-consumer is more profitable than trade sales, but maybe you've never really grasped the specifics. And so the first thing everyone needs to do is to break this down. Look at your sales and cost of goods sold, gross margin by channel. And yes, you also then need to take a look at your sales and marketing costs by channel as well. But let's just focus on gross margin for now. Here you're going to see that direct-to-consumer has a 75% gross margin. I'm actually happy anywhere in kind of the 70 to 80% range gross margin for direct-to-consumer. And we see that trade is a typical 45% gross margin. Now, this could be much, much lower if you're running a lot of wine by the glass programs or DA discounting programs, et cetera. But let's just go for this for a moment. And so now we see because of the channel mix, how we got to this base case of a blended gross margin of 56%. What if we, so the first lesson is we really want to make sure we're breaking down and looking at the income statement by channel. The second thing is inevitably with smaller wineries, we've got to shift more to direct-to-consumer sales. So if we refocus this business model from where it was, from 25% direct-to-consumer to 85% direct-to-consumer, I know that doesn't magically happen overnight, but if we have intent and go for it, without making any other changes, all of a sudden we have a healthy bottom line. 17% in operating income. We can service our debt. We can pay bonuses. We can buy new barrels. You know, our business model now works. Now I'm going to turn this over to Matt, and we'll take a look at something similar for larger wineries.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to drive the point home here with another example here that looks at optimizing your channel mix. So we're going to start with a slightly larger winery at 20,000 cases. We're calling this a mid-size winery, but by Oregon standards, I would say this is a fairly large winery, again, given that most Oregon wineries are under 5,000 cases. So here we've got a situation, again, where we've got a winery that's selling 20,000 cases, and currently they're selling about 15% direct, or about 3,000 cases direct, and then the remaining wholesale, so about 17,000 cases. And you can see with that mix, using the same gross margins that Lesley used before, assuming the DTC channel is at about 75% gross margin, and the wholesale channel is about 45% gross margin, you get a blended average gross margin here of about 52%. And then you take your sales and marketing at 25%, your G&A at 20%, which is a little bit lower than the 30% that Lesley showed in her 5,000 case example, and that's due to some economies of scale that you get as you grow with your G&A expenses. And you note that you're operating at slightly positive from an operating income perspective at about 7%. But you take away interest and taxes, and really at the end of the day, you're essentially breaking even. So we'll look at another case here where we've kind of optimized the business, so to speak, and this should be a benchmark that people are shooting for. And here we've changed the DTC mix to 40%. So we've increased it by 5,000 cases to roughly 8,000 cases, which is a fairly healthy business, DTC. And then the rest is going wholesale. And you can see there that bumps up your gross margin overall to 61%. And then flowing that through to the bottom line, you're now generating a 16% operating income, which at these case levels, and assuming this $35 bottle price point, you're now doing over $1 million in operating income. So again, just driving the point home here that you should really be focused on most businesses on optimizing the DTC portion of their business.
Okay. Great. So we encourage you guys to sit down with your bankers and your tax accountants who should be able to pull for you the relevant wine industry financial benchmark data, just like we did, but detail and show it against your own numbers. That's a very good first step, and if you aren't doing it, I encourage you to. But don't stop there. I encourage you to also do the same thing from the operating metrics side of the business, and which can be even more interesting to wrap your arms around. I bet every executive in the room knows what we call level one. We're talking about operating metrics of the business now. Level one data about the winery. And by that I mean it's annual sales in terms of dollars and cases. It's what percentage you do direct to consumer versus trade. Is direct to consumer growing? Is trade growing? Are you profitable or not? Those are basics. Most of you also probably know what we call level two data, which is starting to be the core into direct-to-consumer. How many visitors you have in the tasting room a year, size of your wine club, size of your mailing list. For trade, the number of distributors, number of states you sell into, size of your sales force. Both level one and level two data are really important. You wouldn't obviously have a business without it. But too many winery executives stop here when they think at that level two, oh, they're going to really know their numbers. They've got their arms around these key figures. Although it's interesting and it's important, we call it the surface data because it's not actionable. If you actually want to really make a change in your business, you need to wrap your arms around level number 3. Many of you have heard me say this in this conference here before over the years. People respect what you inspect. So please make sure that the numbers you focus on, the ones you poke at, are the ones where specific behavior that can actually end up changing specific behaviors in your team. And we're going to dial in and see how this plays out by channel.
So I'm going to focus on the wholesale channel and how you can analyze your performance in the wholesale channel. And I'm going to play on this concept that Lesley brought up of levels. So The way I look at it is level 1, everyone's doing it. Level 2, the more sophisticated wineries are doing it. And level 3, the best-in-class wineries are doing it. So in terms of measuring your wholesale performance, level 1 is simple. It's shipments. This is what you record as revenue on your income statement, and it's shipments that you make to your distributors. Level 2 is depletions, and this is measures movement from the distributors to the retailers. And all or most of your distributors have this data available, these depletion reports as they're called in the industry. And what we found and what I found in my experience is that wineries aren't always diligent about collecting this data. But there's incredibly important data that comes from these depletion reports. You can measure what accounts are strong, what retail accounts are weak. You can also measure if you're building up any inventories at your distributors, which could be cause for concern. So try to get your hands on those depletion reports if they're available from your distributors. Level 3 is scan data, and this data is incredibly important for measuring your performance in the off-premise channel. And this data is provided by Nielsen and IRI, are the two big scan data providers. And this is really, as we've worked with the large wine companies, it's how they assess how brands in their portfolio are performing, and it's also how they look at acquisition candidates and try to identify what brands they might want to acquire based on their performance in the wholesale channel. Now, typically when you get this data, it's in raw form, but you can analyze that data, create charts and graphs, which can be pretty interesting. So we get a Nielsen feed at Zepponi and Company that we use to kind of guide our discussions with wholesale-focused clients. So we put this chart together, and it shows the top 10 Oregon wine brands by volume, all varietals and all price points. And this data comes from the Nielsen food and liquor channels for the 52 weeks ended December 30th, 2017. It's the most current data available. Again, doesn't measure all of the off-premise sales. There's some retailers that don't report it, like Costco, but it is a very good barometer of brand performance. So you can look here and see, if, again, you were a brand in this set, you can see how your average price stacks up against your competitors, what percent of promotional activity you're doing, and also your ACV, which is a very important measure of basically your market breadth. So it's the percentage of stores that you're selling in with all of the stores weighted by size. So to give you an example of how this might be useful in evaluating brands, if you look at the last two brands on the right there, Firesteed and Duck Pond, you can see that, roughly the same price points. Dollar volume sales is, 3.7 versus 3.4 million, so roughly the same. And their growth rates, again, low double-digit growth rates there. But you look at the ACV, and Duck Pond's got an 8.2% ACV. Firesteed has an 18.1% ACV. So with a smaller market breadth, Duck Pond is generating almost the same dollar volume. So the inference that could be made, and larger wine companies look at this, is, hey, if I increase my points of distribution for this brand, I should be able to pick up some very good dollar volume growth there. So again, just some data that people with wholesale brands should be focused on to evaluate their business and also assess the competition.
Okay. So this morning, now we're going to shift kind of the measure what matters operating metrics back to direct-to-consumer. This morning we heard from Rob McMillan a little bit about the direct-to-consumer survey results that Silicon Valley Bank and Wine Business Monthly do every year. Some great D2C benchmarks for Oregon. Yes, Oregon's doing great and growing faster than the industry in almost every single category. Lots to be excited about, and congratulations are well deserved. And yes, I agree with Rob that we do need to find ways to decrease our heavy dependence on local tourism, and we should not be solely focused on wine club members at the expense of other direct-to-consumer programs. However, I also believe that both tasting room and wine club will always be foundational to the core of our direct-to-consumer businesses. And so we have the opportunity here to point out some areas where we could perhaps raise our game in both channels. Starting with tasting room here, let's explore metrics that you should be rigorously tracking yourself. Lots of that level 3 type data here. Let's also discuss what can actually do when you see benchmark information, where we should focus as a region, and what you can do as an individual winery. As complicated as it is with the tasting room, and you've heard me say it before, there's only 3 levers we can pull to grow sales: increase traffic, increase wine order conversion rate, increase average order value. We've heard from Rob that the traffic here in Oregon is one of the few wine regions that keeps growing, and so that's awesome. My question is, are you getting your fair share? If not, then you need to put specific programs in place and track their success. Looking at your monthly traffic versus same month previous year is one of those metrics you should be really rigorous about, because it's foundational to everything else that happens in the tasting room. Next lever is the conversion rate. 68% conversion rate, wine order conversion rate in Oregon, is really healthy. But there's actually 2 more things you could do to make it even better. The first one is around guest experience design. Conversion rates can, as we see here on this chart, can be as high as 73% if we had more private, seated, intimate types of guest experiences. This kind of trend of one-upsmanship that we're seeing in high-touch guest experiences are sure to continue because the numbers are really there to support it. It's going to come up again in a second with Wine Club. The second way to increase your already healthy conversion rates is make sure that you're tracking conversion rates down to your individual team member levels. If you're not, you should be. Non-performers are often hiding in plain sight in our tasting rooms, taking up the space of another server or host who would love to be selling more wine and more clubs and capturing more contact data. The third lever, which is really the average order, is people tend to blow it off because they say, oh, it's just about price point, $77 in Oregon. Well, it's not just that. It's also about the number of bottles per order. In Oregon, it's actually 2.2 bottles per order, 2.2 bottles per order, and for the rest of the country, it's about 2.8. There's some very specific things you can do to increase your average order value if yours happens to be low. You can take a look at your staffing levels, take a look at your incentive compensation, shipping incentives, tasting fees policies. Specifically on tasting fee policies are around where you waive the fee. They're often too low. For example, if your current average order size is 2.2 bottles per order and you waive a tasting fee at 2 bottles, you are actually working to depress your average order size. You always want to waive your tasting fee at something higher than your current average order size, which means as you keep getting better at this, that bar is going to keep moving. That's okay. Trust me, it works. And so, although Oregon direct-to-consumer excuse me, is growing faster than other regions, our wine clubs actually are not. And let's unpack this a bit to see where we can focus. So when wine club members join here in Oregon, on average, we get $605 per year for each and every year that they stay in the club. They're staying about 30 months, so 2.5 years. These are really healthy retention rates. Because these members are so sticky and so profitable, we also don't mind paying staff commissions on these sales. In Oregon, on average, we're paying about $22 per new wine club member sign up. Now, that's actually less than 1.5% of the lifetime revenue of that club member. The lifetime revenue of your club member here is going to be $1,515. That's $605 times the 30 months that they stay. And so if we think about that, compare that to what we do on trade. What percentage of sales are we paying in trade, to get club business that's sticky? And so what happens is there are other regions that are growing faster. And they're paying higher percentage of sales in both member savings and staff commissions. I'm usually very careful about comparing other regions' D2C practices to Napa and Sonoma because I know that every market's really different, but the variance here is actually worth noting. In Napa, winery wine clubs, which are well established, they have big bases, they've been around for a long time, they're continuing to grow at 14, 15% a year. So what's different? Well, they're actually paying more as a percentage of the lifetime revenue of the staff commission, by between 2 to 2.5%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it translates to, if you've got someone who's good at selling clubs, to an extra couple bucks an hour for your tasting room staff, and that is meaningful. And I remember 20 years ago, wineries didn't pay anything in wine club commission, and once it caught on and we started to, all of a sudden clubs exploded. And once tiered commissions caught on, the next stage, where you pay $20 for a 3-bottle shipment, $40 for a 6-bottle shipment, $80 for a 12-bottle shipment, guess what? All of a sudden the higher-end clubs started really growing. And retention is better for the higher-end clubs, and so it's a win-win. Now, back in the next point I wanted to talk about, and this is actually the one that does really concern me, is that our conversion rate here in Oregon for new wine club member signups is still only about 4.2%, and this really has not changed over the last couple years. And it's my biggest concern and our biggest opportunity. It is now actually lagging the national rate, and the national rate has increased from 4% to 6.8% over the past year. And in Sonoma, it's running at 8%, Napa, it's 13%. So there's certainly some room here. There's 3 main factors that we could do to increase our conversion rates. The first question is, do you have the right staffing levels to serve your guests properly? The second one is your staff effectively focused on club member sales by, it's usually 2 things. 1, motivating commission levels, we just talked about that. And second is confidence through sales skills and proper training. The third point, and it's interesting here, is your guest experience design optimizing your wine club conversions? Just like we saw in those tasting room stats, here the wine club conversion rates get really interesting when you look at this type of guest experience. Only 3.4% of wine clubs are converted standing up at the tasting room bar. These are national numbers. But yet 11% are converted for private seating. And so that's why you're seeing this giant shift towards different types of guest experiences. More private seating have higher conversion rates, higher average order values. The numbers are so compelling, it's led to really a trend in wine regions across the country for new guest experience design. So I hope that you guys go back to your wineries and do your own math and answer really the 4 questions that I have here that are implied in these numbers. One is, how long is your membership tenure by club? And once you see what that bell curve looks like, what can you do 2 months before the peak of that curve, to give some additional retention programming, some extra love to get them to stay longer, get them over the hump? Second is, what's the average annual revenue of your club members and your lifetime revenue? So your annual revenue times the number of months they stay, and what percentage, the commission you pay, what percentage is your commission of that? Is it high enough? If you increased it, would it change behavior of your team? And what is the club conversion rate as a group and as individuals within your team? And why they're not all going to be equal, but why are some people higher than others? What could you do about that? And finally, what could you do to optimize your guest experience design to promote better club conversions? That's a lot of metrics. And I don't want to, before I leave this section, I want to just underline one point that is important as all the metrics are. It's even more important to understand why. Metrics tell you what's happening in your direct-to-consumer channels, but you also need to use tools to help you understand why it's happening. There's a bunch of different things you can do. You can do mystery shopping. Obviously, Wise does that. Monitoring social feedback. Really like being all over Yelp and TripAdvisor and SellerPass and watching those trends. Why are these things happening? So you can catch people doing things right and get rid of stuff that's not working. And definitely doing customer surveys. That lends you much more insight into what the metrics really mean. Hand it back to you, Matt.
Great. So the last section that Lesley and I are going to cover is what we're terming the health checkup. So we'll start here. And when Lesley and I were talking, she was asking me, well, what are some of the things that you do in preparing a business for sale? And so these are kind of two common things that we do, but it also applies just best business practices for continuing to run your wine business. So the first one, and usually we deal with this a lot, is cleaning up financial information. So ideally you have reviewed or even compiled financial statements from a third-party firm, and those financial statements are in accordance with GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles, and industry standards. So what we run into commonly are issues with inventory costing, and incorrect inventory costing or inventory costing that's not done on a timely basis. And Lesley will cover that a little bit later when she talks about planning and budgeting. And it's also in Tim's model that he's going to show to everybody. It's important to really understand your inventory costing because the inventory life cycles are so long in the wine industry. And then secondarily, we also run into problems sometimes with calculations of net revenue. Discounts and depletion allowances aren't properly classified, and so once we do that, it sometimes results in adjustments to net revenue. And then also owner discretionary expenses. And this is just a fancy way of saying expenses that run through the business that may not be entirely business related. And I know no one here probably does that, but there are some people out there that will occasionally do that for tax reasons. But it's important to go ahead and flag those expenses. I realize that most people will do that. Flag those expenses and then remove them when you're trying to gauge the true performance of your business or trying to reward employees for improving the financial performance of the business. Proper documentation is important. Again, some things we typically run into are trademarks that, believe it or not, are not registered or improperly registered. And then making sure that you're monitoring your trademarks for infringement and you're actively defending that trademark. Grape and bulk wine contracts, again, I realize that by and large this is a cottage industry, but it's really good to get those, if you can, those handshake contracts in writing, and then make sure, if you can, to negotiate assignability clauses so that if at some point in the future that contract needs to be transferred to a third party, it's allowable. Distributor contracts. So we're seeing more and more distributors, and not surprisingly, given all the really large brand transactions we've seen, that distributors will embed termination fees into their contracts. So just pay attention to that and make yourself aware of it. You don't want to get caught off guard if there is a termination fee in one of your contracts and you don't realize that. Make sure that your operating permits and licenses are current and up to date. And then finally, in terms of confidentiality agreements, I think it's a good business practice to have those in place with your key employees.
Okay. So thanks, Matt. So over the past 27 years in the wine industry, I've started up and ran a bunch of businesses. And some of the best advice I ever got early on was to plan your work and work your plan. So no matter how cool my initial plans are when I start a new business or morph one that I've got going into something new, which I tend to do a lot, is that they never really take off until my entire team gets involved in the planning process. And it is a process. It's a continual cycle. One of the biggest gaps I see with working with wineries on various change management related projects is an entire lack of real planning process. I mean, I know we plan on the grape supply. We've got to, because you've got to think so many years in advance. but it's just really rare that there's the level of rigor that I would want to see. And now I know it's challenging. You know, the new year rolls around, and it's so tempting just to take last year's budget spreadsheet and blow the dust off of it, put in the new numbers, and call it a day and get back to what you really love to be doing. But you're missing one of these really cool opportunities that can take your company to the next level and build your team to the next level. And so, especially important if you want to someday be less involved in the day-to-day operations of the business, or pass it on to the kids, or potentially set it up for sale. All those possibilities open up when wineries have mastered what I call the planning cycle as part of their DNA, as part of their culture. And here's how the planning cycle works in my companies, as well as in many of our wise wineries. So first of all is the strategic plan step. Okay, that's a little obvious, but there's an aspect of it that doesn't change, like why we're here and where we're going, over the right hill versus the left hill. But often the team needs kind of an ongoing reminder of what's at the core. The part that can't be stepped over or missed is what I call that annual update process, the reality check on our assets, what's working, and our challenges, what's holding us back, and our key opportunities that are going to keep us on point to meet that strategy. It's called many different things, a SWOT analysis, or hits or misses list. But don't forget, this is an important step that should be done in each and every time before you sit down to start a budgeting cycle again. Long-term planning considerations obviously need to be part here, especially because of the long-term grape supply and the inventory cycles that Matt was just talking about. Next comes the operating plan. So a portion of it's in words, what we're focusing on and why, and the numbers, which is the budget for the coming year. Now, incentive compensation needs to be linked to delivering the specific planned results. And so it's critically important that everybody participating in the incentive compensation program at the management level is involved in this budgeting process. Otherwise, you're not going to get buy-in. You're not going to get accountability. You're just going to create some budget off in a corner, and it's not going to be this motivating tool that it can and should be. Next comes the action plan, which is pretty straightforward. Who's doing what by when? Now, too often, if a winery even has gone through this stop, that's kind of the process. It's like, okay, great, here's our plan for the year. And a year later, they kind of go back and look at it again. But really healthy wineries, it's alive. It's a living, breathing process and document. This is where the plan your work your plan comes in. It's not just an annual project that gathers dust on the bookshelf. So on a monthly basis, what we want to see that we're monitoring revenues and expenses and some of those KPI metrics we just were talking about. It's really important that you're looking at where you're at, not just versus your plan, but where you're at versus previous year. You know, you're actually managing the changes based off of previous year, not off of plan, although we have to deliver the plan. And by doing this process, having this discipline, you'll be managing to no surprises, and your team's going to be better able to get that incentive compensation. Closely linked to this are what I call the financial forecasts, the rolling forecasts that should be updated each and every month, both the financials as well as the direct-to-consumer and trade channel dashboards that feed them. They should be updated so that way at any given time throughout the year you should know, best guess, given what I know today, where we're going to end up the year. It really helps you to see trouble ahead before it comes, and when you have the ability to course correct. It's also really important to model out grape and bulk wine cost increases as they occur and factor into your projections. Tim's going to walk us through this tool to help us with that. There's no better time for budgeting next February of 2019, than the day after this February ends, because it's fresh in your mind. If you actually have that level of discipline, I call it the 13-month budget, constantly you're going forward, always planning next year, you'll never actually have to do an annual budget again, because it's constantly just rolling and you're just tweaking. So speaking of budgeting, we have a different approach for this too. With our Wise Winery clients, we never, ever, ever want to see someone turn in a budget, just that single spreadsheet. Here's the budget with the line items. Instead, what we have is the four-sided pyramid approach. It always has the overview, which is a brief story about what the current reality, what's our goals going forward, changes we need to make, and why. And it has the metrics, those key financials that link to that story and the goals. And it has the budget, the one you're normally used to. And it has the tactics of who's doing what by when. When we get our winery partners to shift to this level of process, it completely changes their relationship, especially if you've got line item managers doing it. It completely changes their relationship with the rest of the winery, with the CFO, with the team. I've got wineries who take this level into the bank. They never just say, here's our plan for next year. It's the full four-sided pyramid. Because that way, if something goes wrong or someone pushes back on the budget, you say, fine, I've really thought this through. You can't just take out the expenses and expect the same revenue because everything's really connected. It changes your relationship across the board, with your board, and with your family if that's relevant. So I want to thank Matt for his help in putting this section together, and I hope we've gained a couple ideas of new things to do. What we're going to do now is shift gears, continue to talk about benchmarking, but shift gears to, I should have had the salary survey out there, but salary survey, and we're going to shift to the next one. So all serious wine regions around the world have their own salary survey, and now, thanks to the man you're about to meet, for the very first time, we do too. The Oregon Wine Board worked in conjunction with Linfield professor Jeff Peterson to develop the first Oregon wine industry salary survey. This was developed in a model of the Wine Business Monthly Salary Survey, but directly targeted to Oregon producers with local outreach to assist in the data collection. Thanks to those of you who did participate in December and January, and we hope more continue to. We now have this very important data for our industry because of your efforts, and thank you to Jeff for his hard work in developing and analyzing the results. Yay. There you go.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Looks like we all made it here through the snow. It's nice being on a panel with Tim Hanni because he's one of the few people that can make me look like a wallflower. So it's kind of, it's a compliment, I'm sure. Yes, as many of you know, Linfield is taking an increasingly larger role in its engagement with the wine industry. We have a minor. We're working on a major that is a liberal arts-based major. And as part of that, about a year ago, I taught a course on the sociology of work and wine and started looking around for data on labor in Oregon. And I did find the Oregon Business Month, or the Wine Business Monthly data, and pretty much nothing else. And so in conversations that I had with people in the wine industry and with the Oregon Wine Board, we started talking about the idea of doing a labor survey. And so we started talking about that this summer. It takes a while to get a survey together and to get it into shape, do pre-testing, make sure that you're getting the answers that you want to answer. Some of you hopefully, some of you in the room have actually answered it already. We have about 170 responses so far. We'd like more, so this is both sort of a bit of an early report, but also asking you, if you haven't done this, to go ahead. The link is still open. I know you all faithfully open and read every Oregon Wine Board email that ever comes across your laptop. But the goal here was to, on the one hand, replicate some of what Wine Business Monthly does, which you will notice is strictly a base salary report. And the reason why it's strictly a base salary report is because it is remarkably the easiest, simplest thing to do and not complicate your life, as we subsequently did with this survey which is more Oregon-based. So the problem with the Wine Business Monthly survey as it comes to Oregon is that we are such a small part of the national wine industry that they have one or two breakout tables in their report that that talks about base salaries for wineries under 50,000 cases, which is pretty much all of the Oregon wine industry with, a few exceptions, right? So that was one of the questions, was to let's go ahead and do something that is more Oregon-based. And our hope is to be able to do this survey every year then, so that we can sort of track this, establishing a baseline this year and then keep tracking it. So we did base salary. This is why the terms, if you've seen them, are as they are, asking about base salaries for an executive winemaker and other positions. We've added quite a few other positions based on feedback from members of the Oregon wine industry. We also had some people who wanted, or most of the team wanted, to have some way of figuring bonuses and incentives. We did not do healthcare. We'll probably do a separate survey on healthcare costs eventually. Another interesting part of this, right, is that we're looking at tasting rooms, wineries, and vineyards that don't have wineries, and wineries that don't have vineyards or tasting rooms. So we have to have a lot of filter questions. So the original survey was about 103 pages long, which we were able to cut down, and with a lot of filters. But it's a complicated thing when you add those three features, and then the fact that we have a lot of wineries that are making less than 2,500 cases, and then we have some that are making well over 50,000. So then also we have some questions on gender on a few of the positions, not all of them, again, to sort of try and just get a little bit of a grip on gender equity in the future. And then one of the things that we've reminded people is that it is completely anonymous. Even all of the IP addresses are stripped before they come to me. So I don't actually have any way, and neither does anyone else, of tracking this information in terms of specifically where it comes from. So this is sort of what the page opens to, if you've seen it. And what we do is we ask you to gather the information first on base salary information and on bonuses and incentives as a percentage of the total base salary, and then report that. And if you do all of that, it probably takes you about 20 minutes if you have to fill out the entire survey. So what we're trying to do is get people to answer the questions and get them through pretty quickly through the survey. So this is just to give you a little bit of an idea. I'm going to just show you a couple of tables. The plan is to do a webinar later this spring with the data that we have available. And we'll kind of be able to tease out more information for you and respond to questions that you have about it. So this just gives you some of the data that we have so far. So this is total reported. So in other words, you have to have a vineyard, or you have to have a tasting room, and then you have to have said, yes, I hire a full-time tasting room manager, and this is the base salary. Okay? So this is why there's a variation there. Not everyone, it's relative to size. I don't care what you say, size matters. And it is so you have a tendency here for not a lot of people are able to pay their own labor crew. So you're going to have a much smaller number of people for that. So this just gives you the average salary. So this is about, I think the last bit of data I had, I think I had 168 total respondents who filled out the survey, right? And then of those people, total 62 reported that they had a full-time tasting room manager that they hired. And then this is the average base salary is $42,015.19, right? So you can work your way down through there. Executive winemakers, $73,000. The pay for the director of sales, if you have one, again, smaller numbers there because there are smaller numbers of people that have director of sales and marketing. And then direct to consumer sales manager at the bottom there, again, smaller number of respondents. So a lot of this is based on the number of respondents it's all based on the number of respondents as they have reported having those, and if so, then they give us the actual salary. So far, given the number of given the number of where people come from in terms of the AVAs, it looks pretty representative to me. So far, in terms of relative number of cases that people talk about in terms of subcategories, I would say we do pretty well. I think it's pretty representative of where we are in Oregon for those 162. Obviously, the more people we have respond, the more confident information I have at all of those levels. This is just one breakout to give you an idea of what it looks like. So this is for executive winemaker pay, and I've got tables for all of the positions. So I go through, the categories are actually smaller than that. So we go 1,000, and then we go to 1,001 to 2,500, et cetera. But I've recoded those to consolidate a little bit. So this gives you an idea of, at the different levels, for those reporting full-time salary, base pay, this is what the averages are for each one of those categories. So what I would argue in terms of interpreting the data in my case, I would say I'm pretty confident of this number because it's pretty representative of the total that you see. Probably down here, as we know, it's harder to pay yourself when you're making 5,000 cases or less. So that's, the more people we have responding, the better we feel about that. We feel better about these up here because those are a little bit more characteristic of people being, more of those people are able to pay full-time salaries. So this is kind of, you can see the progression there from 2,500 is about 58,000 to 20,000 or more cases. There's a pretty linear progression there, which also tells me it's pretty representative so far. So again, this is just for people who have a winemaker that they pay as an executive winemaker, and they pay full time. So what we'll do in the webinar is break those down. We'll also have the percentage of the bonuses as represented, and we can play a little bit around with the cases of more or fewer. But my job will be to compare that to the wine business monthly data, and also compare it in terms of sort of cost of living, which is a whole nother procedure that we'll engage in when we do the webinar. So look for the dates for that. So there will be a webinar forthcoming. I'll be working with Bree and with others on that, and which will go into a lot more depth on the base salary survey. I think it's up to about 168 responses. 20-25 minutes to fill out the survey. Tell your family, tell your friends. And there is still time to fill out the survey, and that's kind of where we are right now. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, for the great work on that and the really swift turnaround. And I encourage anyone who hasn't filled that survey out to please do so and continue to build our benchmarking data for our state. It's really important for us to continue our success as an industry going forward. The second tool that we've also been working on for the past 6 months is a wine channel and profit calculator tool, profit and margin calculator tool. This has been done in conjunction with Tim Hanni, MW, with his Wine Biz Sim program and workbooks. And it's a profit calculator tool that will provide the cost of goods from vineyard planting, grape growing, production in the cellar, cellaring and storage of your wine. And then also tell you the cost of goods in terms of the channel management and your sales and marketing team also. We will roll out workbooks on this tool and also workshops around it for the coming year and beyond. The first ones are going to be at the end of March. The first one's on the 26th and 27th of March. One at Linfield and one at the Chemeketa Eola Wine Study Center, and then we'll be moving to Medford on the 28th. So in well, I should just let Tim get up and show you now. But you can also please register your interest for this tool and for the workshops at industry.oregonwine.org/access-request, and that will give you a form to fill in to register your interest. And when we go live, it will also be listed in the Grapevine to sign up for those workshops and those workbooks. We will start to develop strategy and business channel management. There's a tasting room workbook also, where no doubt WISE will come in very handy in assessing that also. Oh, I've lost Tim for a minute. And I'd really like to thank, while Tim's doing that, I'd like to thank all of the finance accountants who have been indispensable in helping me put this benchmarking together for this tool for our industry here. There's nothing that has been released like that for a wine industry, such a comprehensive cost of goods and profit margin calculator tool in the world that we know of. So it's pretty exciting for us, and we're going to put a lot of effort into getting everyone to thoroughly use and understand this workbook. And thank you again to everyone who's contributed to getting this together. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. And how many people here were involved in helping us debug and feedback for this? I just want to acknowledge all of you. And my special thanks for Sheldon helping me get this set up. I've been using winery business simulation as a teaching aid for over 30 years, and over these years we've developed workbooks, spreadsheets. 7 years ago I became part of faculty for online wine business education and training with Sonoma State. I now teach with Napa Valley College and other organizations. What we're really trying to create, who loves spreadsheets? You'd rather sit down with spreadsheets than a glass of wine. Who would like to be able to sit down with a glass of wine and play a graphics deficient form of Farmville? And that's quite literally what we're trying to create. We're trying to take the basic, everything that they've been talking about, the levers that you need to push and pull to understand how to install the best practices, the best procedures into your business, and then also engage the people that are critical in your business into that process, winemaking, tasting room, etc., the sales and marketing. So what we're proud to announce is we've got the free version of the cost of goods calculator up and running, and it's available. I'll also be doing demonstrations at the Oregon Wine Board booth, and I'm going to get Sheldon to give me a cable, so tomorrow we'll have it on the monitor. Sheldon, make a note of that. And what this consists of, the free version, there's a couple of caveats. Number one, it works best on a laptop or a PC. We're optimizing it for tablet and iPad. It's a series of tabs, and actually I've got the wrong tab open. Okay, so this is what it looks like. There's a series of tabs where you put in basic information about a wine project. We're going to give you a dashboard that's going to give you different metrics of your FOB price, the tonnage of grapes that are required, your total cost of grapes. It's going to calculate a number of things, including your critical margins. The way we've got this set up is when you enter your grapes. For example, we've got Pinot Noir. I can also go in here and look at costs for Cabernet Sauvignon, and the survey work that's being done on salaries and grape prices and whatever is all going to improve and make this tool better over time. So from the pull down, if you pick Cabernet Sauvignon, it will give you benchmark prices, the average Oregon price, the low, the high, and then where the data is available by key AVAs. And so you can put in 100% of a wine. So if we're making a Pinot Noir, We just simply scroll down there, we plug in Pinot Noir, it tells us a full range of prices, and then you enter your known cost or projected cost per ton. And as you do that, when you're entering prices, you'll be able to immediately see what the cost per ton does to your gross margin as a total, and then also your per case gross margin. So you can add up to 7 wines in a blend, or if you're making a Pinot Noir from several different vineyards, you can put in the tonnage and the percentage that goes into it. And then once we get that cost, we go to the next tab, and when we do, you come to a toggle for your, at the press, how many cases do you anticipate or you're forecasting or know you get out of a ton per grape. And so we again will put in, this will all be pre-filled and you get to go and play with it. And as I toggle this up, sit down with your winemaker and say, hey, if you squeeze an extra ton, now watch the gross margin over there. And you talk with your winemaker and say, that's your bonus going up. So you can actually sit down with your team and go through these things, and it really is relatively fun and engaging. Put in your pre-fermentation costs for handling and treatments, and we've got, again, we'll have standard sort of benchmark prices, but you get to put in your own numbers. And then all the way through, then we also have links. I'm not going to try this because I'm not sure if I'm on the internet here, but this links to the TTB tax board and to the schedule of taxation and things like that. And then you go to cellar and storage. We've got a few rudimentary modifiers. Now the free version you can play with all you want, but you can't save your projects. So you go through, but what you can do is you can print the project and have a copy. So if you're a member of the Oregon Wine Board, however, we will have, and this is what we're going to launch with the education programs in the end of March and train people in how to use this. We've got a full bore cost calculator that has things like, with you'll notice there's more tabs here, and with the barrel aging as an example, it gives you a complete barrel management program to input what your program's going to be for the wine, how many months, and which kind of oak, new or used, what was the cost of the barrels, what's your evaporation amount, what's your cost of topping wine, and what's your resale cost of the barrel once you're done with it, and gives you your complete depreciated costs, how many barrels you'll need of which kind of oak, and so on and so forth. So the free version is only 4 tabs. It's kind of fun to sit down and run quick scenarios. But what we're going to be launching at the end of March is going to be an entire suite of products that will have the full cost calculator. It will also have a program management. So for your portfolio, what you do is you put in each of your wines, your cost of goods that you can calculate or however you arrive at that, your FOB costs, and your production, and then it's going to break out that, and you can put up to, I think, 12 wines into that. When you go to the next tab, this is where it starts to get really fun. You can put in each wine and what percentage you're selling through your tasting room, through your wine club, through account direct, in-state, through 3-tier system, and through export. And then it'll run you your calculations and all your allocations, and you can run these different scenarios and look at the levers that we were talking about, pushing and pulling, and how all that works. So this also will be able to work with Linfield, I'm hoping, on their stuff, because you can put in your entire winery payroll. We'll have benchmark pricing in here, and then you enter salaries and the cost of benefits, bonuses, and so forth, and it allows you to run your complete small or large winery and manage your payroll and things like that, plus all the things that were talked about, sales incentives, promotions, post-offs, discounts, all the stuff you give away. So that's the second workbook. Now, these are the 2 workbooks that we'll be using in our day-long education programs at the end of March. And then coming down the pike at the same time in a whole separate set of workbooks or education programs is going to be to manage your tasting room and D2C business, wine clubs. So it allows you to track and enter different scenarios for how many visitors you have, what's your conversion rate, how much wine do you sell, what is that point to start offering the incentives, how much are the incentives you offer. One of the things that come with this are also going to be tutorial videos. And the things we're going to talk about, a lot of people look at D2C as this panacea and this huge profit margin, and you're cutting out the middleman. No, you're becoming the middleman. And there are so many expenses involved, and people just put a pen and pencil or pen to paper and run some numbers and say, oh, we're making a killing, but they're not looking at the cost of acquisition of customers and the churn rate and how much you're spending in free shipping and all these other things. So this helps you run and manage your tasting room and wine club also. And let's see, where are we then? So we've got worksheets so you can create up to 6 wine clubs at different prices, different frequencies, and so on and so forth, and throw that into your P&L. Tasting room expenses that literally drills all the way down into the cost of recharging the fire extinguishers in terms of details, because you're now in the retail wine business. You didn't cut out the retailer, you are it. And then we've got then the worksheets for the operations and personnel for the tasting room and so on. So you can operate your direct-to-consumer business as a true business unit, not you just schlep some wine over there, they sell it, and you think you make all that money. We will also have a winery operations workbook that'll be similar to all this, that you input all your stuff in salaries and operational expenses and that kind of stuff. And then finally, the last one that'll be probably delivered, we're hoping in May, is going to be a complete vineyard workbook with all the inputs for establishing, maintaining all the treatments, tracking, and running a 10-year business plan and looking at the financial viability of vineyards and so on. So that's the pragmatic end of Tim Hanni. Who didn't think there was a pragmatic bone in my body? Okay. We'll be doing demonstrations of this. It's booth 543, and it's against the back wall of the show. And come over and see us, and we'll be doing demonstrations and talking about it. And the entire suite of products will be available for free for any Oregon Wine Board members. And contact Bree about that, and we can start sign-ups as soon as we get that program. And you can start playing with the free version immediately. It's up and running and available to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have about 5 more minutes. Do we have any questions? I know you've been drinking from the fire hose for the last 75 minutes. Any questions for the group? We've got a runner here with a microphone. Questions for Jeff or Tim? Yes, over here.
Yes. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. So early on there, I don't recall what presentation, there was a discussion about entering the cost of grapes. And so my immediately thought, is this the cost of purchased grapes, or is it the cost of producing those grapes for a vineyard that only, or a winery that only uses their estate fruit?
Yeah, give that to Tim.
Oh, so it's really important to look at when you enter the cost of grapes in the next field. There's also a field to add any incidental expenses or things like sorting table losses in certain vineyards when you're culling a lot of fruit and so forth. So the program in the user version is set up to account for any special things that come up with transportation costs, additional storage fees, sorting, and all that kind of stuff, so that you don't just look at your contracted price to the winery. You've got everything that goes into it to give a really accurate picture of the cost.
And the vineyard workbook that will be developed hopefully by the spring will have in that all of your farming costs and posts, labor, spray schedule, your live certification or whatever certifications you're applying, and you'll be able to plug and play those price points in there, and that will spit out what your true cost of grapes is.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, right over.
So for us Excel geeks, are you looking at the possibility of us uploading a database to populate the fields so we don't have to sit and do all that hand entry?
At this time, we don't have the technological capacity to do that. So if you've already got the spreadsheets and you've got and you're working with your accountants and financial people, you're probably well suited. But if you do want to do these programs, there's ways to actually do it with less input, that you've got your spreadsheets with more details, and then you can use these to run scenarios. In the user version, you'll be able to you'll have an account that'll be set up. You'll be given a list of the workbooks. You can open, create, save, and recall the work. So it's not like the free version that you print it and then you lose it, basically. You'll also be able to set up certain workbooks so that you can create them and then clone them to make next year's forecast, or looking at different profitability scenarios, but it doesn't have a capacity to upload and populate from spreadsheets. Sorry, but we'll look at it.
Just a quick clarification. The free version is available to everybody in the wine industry. The more sophisticated version, where you can save and clone, etc., and the more elaborate version is available to the Oregon Wine Growers Association members, correct?
No, actually, that's the entire tool is free to Oregon producers. What it costs you is your email registration and sign up to get access to the workbooks. So this isn't a OWA.
Okay, so everybody really is going to have it, access to the whole program.
This is the people's tool. All it will cost you is your email registration.
That's what I thought, because we used Wine Board money to pay for it, but I wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
I think we had another question down here somewhere. Yes.
I would like to know if you have any recommendations for getting those metrics, just the basic metrics about how many people walk in the door, things like that. I'm really struggling with finding an easy way to keep track of that.
Yeah, there's not one right and wrong way, specifically on a visitor count. One of the easiest ways is most POS systems would allow you to set up as a SKU in the visitor count, basically a visitor. So you have zero cost next to that. And so you're just tracking as people are coming in how many visitors you're seeing. And so even if they're paid or unpaid, that's a great way to do the denominator. My strong recommendation is count everybody. Don't just count only the people that taste, or only that or someone sharing, because you really want a sense for how many people are coming in your door. It's the only objective count you can do. And also then that makes a difference on labor and space. And so from there, then most POS systems allow you to know how many orders you had that were not tasting fees, and that's going to give you your conversion rate and average order value. So hopefully your POS system can handle it. Next question. Got any more? Okay, I think you guys must be thirsty. See you at the reception. Thank you. And thank you to the panel.